Can you all see me? Okay. Yechi Adonai Rabbeinu Rabbeinu Melech Mashiach Le'olam V'ad. Yechi Adonai Rabbeinu Rabbeinu Melech Mashiach Le'olam V'ad. Yechi Adonai Rabbeinu Rabbeinu Melech Mashiach Le'olam V'ad. Welcome to the 29th annual conference of the Rabbi Yisrael Ayalev Research Institute on Moshiach and the Sciences. In a few minutes, I'm going to give some background who Rabbi Yisrael Ayalev was and what the Institute is all about and how it came to be. But first, I want to mention that this is Rabbi Yisrael Ayalev's yahrzeit right now. Rabbi Yisrael Ayalev ben Kvod Kedushas Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, the Rebbe Melech Mashiach's brother. As yahrzeit, Yud Gimel Iyar. Yud Gimel is Gematria Echad. There are a few yahrzeits that happen on the 13th of the month. Gematria Yud Gimel Gematria Echad. There's a Tzemach Tzedek, Yud Gimel Nisan. The Rebbe Marash, Yud Gimel Tishrei. And there's a famous word that those two yahrzeits are connected, as indicated in the pasuk, Echad be'echad yigoshu. Echad ben Nisan, that's the Tzemach Tzedek, Yud Gimel Nisan. Echad be'tishrei, that's the Rebbe Marash. Exactly 6 months apart, years later, of course. But the point is that there was a close, very, very close connection between the Tzemach Tzedek and the Rebbe Marash. And he was the youngest son, but he had a special connection to the Tzemach Tzedek more than the other sons. And of course, he is the one who became the Rebbe after the Tzemach Tzedek. Now, Rabbi Yisrael Ayalev's yahrzeit is Yud Gimel Iyar. Yud Gimel is also Gematria Echad. And there's a sikha from sometime back in the Mems where it's not Muga. Most of the sikha is Muga, but not this part. But in the Hosafos, it quotes it, that the Rebbe Melech Mashiach say the same thing applies to Rabbi Yisrael Ayalev. Yahrzeit Yud Gimel Iyar, Yud Gimel is Gematria Echad, also part of the Echad Be'echad Yigashu. And L'ha'ir, in the biographies of Rabbi Yisrael Ayalev, it mentions that his father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, once said that Rabbi Yisrael Ayalev has the Tzemach Tzedek's cup. He has the Tzemach Tzedek's head, Tzemach Tzedek's mind. Iyar, Yud Gimel Iyar. So Iyar is the famous Roshei Tevos, Aleph Yud Yud Reish, standing for Ani Hashem Rofecha. Now this is something that we, the Yidden, the B'miuchad, and the world as a whole needs tremendous refuah. Everybody knows what's going on. And now is the time for it. Ani Hashem Rofecha. Hashem will certainly bring the refuah shlema for all Yidden and for all mankind in this month and in this day, on this day. I would like to mention especially our friend and colleague, Professor Yirmiyahu Branover, Shikha, Yirmiyahu ben Devora, the refuah shlema. He's been sick a long time, way far too long years, with various neurological problems, nothing to do with the virus. But he's basically paralyzed and incommunicative. And it's vade that we'll all agree that this man has done so much for Yiddishkeit and Yidden, and especially Russian Jews, helping them come out of Russia and get settled in Eretz Yisrael, and inspiring. He's one of the inspirations of our organization, Rabbi Yisrael Ayalev Institute, inspiring the study of Torah and Lahavdil science, how there's no problem, there's no real contradiction if you learn Torah, kipshuto, and you learn science honestly. A lot to say about that, but Yirmiyahu ben Devar should have a first shlema. About Rabbi Yisrael Leib. Personally, he was the youngest brother of the Rebbe Melech Moshiach. He was a special person. There's a story that once when he was a very little boy, one of the Gaonim was visiting Rabbi Leib Yitzchak's home, and little Yisrael Leib was sitting at the end of the table with the Mishnayos open in front of him, looking at it. So at one point, the Rav, this Gaon, he said jokingly to Rabbi Leib Yitzchak, does he know what's going on there? He's looking at the page. Does he know what he's reading? So Rabbi Leib Yitzchak told Yisrael Leib to say what he's learning, and he said over the whole thing brilliantly and in detail. Very impressive. Also in his youth, when he was a teenager, there's a famous story that Rabbi Simchana wrote in her memoirs about Rabbi Yisrael Leib as follows. The Chassid Simcha Gorodetsky, was the shliach of the Frierdiker Rebbe to, among other things, raise money for the Tomchei Tmimim Yeshiva in Lubavitch. And he would travel around as the mashpia and also to raise money. You know, the expression, plant ruchnius and harvest gashmius. One year during the 9 days before Tisha B'Av, he was visiting at the home of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. And one night while he was there, Rabbi Simchana approaches Rabbi Simcha Gorodetsky and says to him, "Come here, I want to show you something." She takes him to Rabbi Yisrael Leib's room, where Rabbi Yisrael Leib is sitting by a table learning Gemara. And she starts calling his name. Label. No response. Now, of course, it's not unusual for a teenager that his mother calls him and he pretends like he doesn't hear. So what was going on here? So she goes, takes it with Simcha Gorodetsky into the room. She goes up to him close and calls label, and pulls on his sleeve like to get his attention. And they see that he is totally oblivious to what's going on around him. He doesn't even know that anybody's there. So this is what Reb Simchana wanted to demonstrate. She turns to Reb Simcha and says to him with a big smile, "You see the shekida of my son Label? You see the diligence of my son Label?" He was like that. And I'll tell one more story along those lines from later in his life, when he, after all the things going on in Russia and in Europe and the war, and he managed to get out of Europe and get to Eretz Yisrael. He settled in Tel Aviv. At that time, he made connection with other Chabad Hasidim in Tel Aviv, and his chavrusa, he made a chavrusa in Hasidus with the famous Chassid Reb Nachum Goldschmidt. Now, Reb Nachum Goldschmidt is most famous probably for his parish on the Tanya, which is extremely, wonderful, brilliant parish, the Shiurim on the Tanya. So they happen to be childhood friends from Yekaterinoslav, Reb Nachum Goldschmidt and Yisrael Leib. So they started a chavrusa together. Now, this story I heard from the son of an eyewitness to it. The eyewitness was the son of Reb David Goldschmidt, who was Rosh Hashiva in Eretz Yisrael, and I heard the story from his son, Reb David Goldschmidt, the shliach here in New York. By the way, I'm speaking to you from Crown Heights, Ir Habira, Rebbe Melech Moshiach's capital, and this is going all over the world. We'll talk about that too. So they used to learn together. So Reb Nachum's son was a little boy at the time, and he would, play around. So he would tell that he would come in the morning and see them sitting down together, Reb Nachum and Reb Yisrael Leib, and starting to learn, and then they would just stop talking and quietly put their head down like this on their hand, and basically what he described as thinking to each other. Okay, and they'd stay like that for a long time. So the little boy is playing, He comes back hours later in the afternoon and he sees that they're both still sitting like that in the same position. There's a lot of shkita going around there, a lot of diligence, and maybe just geholfen that I should have efes katsehu, of a drop of that, I mean, a little more than a drop, a few ounces, I'll call him, to do the work that I have to do. Well, eventually, Rabbi Yisrael Leib, in 1948, Tavshin Ches, he was in the Eretz Yisrael, and he got an offer from the University of Liverpool to be to have a position in the Department of Physics. Now, he was a mathematician by profession. He learned on his own. He learned at a school in Leningrad for a time. But he was a brilliant mathematician, and he was given this offer. And what is the first thing he did? What's the first thing a chassid does when he's offered a major position, or even something, any position? He writes to the Rebbe. So he wrote a letter to the Frierdiker Rebbe. And this letter, if you've ever seen this Kovitz, Yud Gimel Iyar Boim Shona, which was put out for the 40th Yortzeit of Rabbi Yisrael, which was in Tavshin Nun Beis, the letter is reprinted there, the Frierdiker Rebbe's answer to his letter. And the Frierdiker Rebbe, first of all, addresses him with extraordinary titles that, as Rabbi Moshiach once said, that the Frierdiker Rebbe did not throw around titles, carelessly. He addresses him as, the letter is dated Yud Zayin Kislev Hei Tavshin Ches. And the Frierdiker Rebbe addresses Rabbi Yisrael Leib as Yedidi, Nachad Dikni Zik, something like that. Mechutoni, Anichbad, Bal Kishoro Nela, Vosik Lechosid, Ish Yirei Elokim, Mar Leib Sheyichya. Shalom Abracha. Then the Frierdiker Rebbe tells him to take the position and gives him a shlichus there. He says, when you get to England, start looking into making translations of Chassidus. He said, we need a translation of the Tanya into English. We need a translation of stories about the Baal Shem Tov, biography of the Baal Shem Tov, Talmidim, Baal Shem Tov and their biographies, and so on. To translate them to English, Ha'atoka Chovshis im Ha'oros Tochnios V'nogea Le'havonos V'inyanim V'tochonam. A readable translation with notes that make it easier to understand. So he was given, Rabbi Yisrael Leib was given a shlichus to make contact with the Balei Lashon, people who had good command of the English language. They're in England and they knew Hebrew. They're able to work on translating these for him. Well, unfortunately, first of all, this was 1948. Rabbi Yisrael Leib did not, because the war broke out in Eretz Yisrael, so Rabbi Yisrael Leib didn't get to England until a couple of years later. And then a couple of years after that, in Tavshin Yud Beis, 1952, he had a heart attack and he passed away. He's buried in Sfas. And I will just tell you that the story, when I heard the story of his life, now, he was not well known until like the Tavshin Mems, when the Rebbe Moshiach would make Farbrengens and say Mamorim, and eventually publish Kuntus Yud Gimel Iyar, which made essentially Yud Gimel Iyar a day on the Chabad calendar. Not just a day when a certain event came. Like there's other important dates of Yortzites and birthdays of major Hasidim, but if you call it Kuntus Yud Gimel Iyar, it's like saying Kuntus Chof Dalet Teves. Like that the Alter Rebbe's Yortzeit and Chof Dalet Teves made the whole day a special day, the whole day, and not just that a special event took place. Kuntus Yud Gimel Iyar means Yud Gimel Iyar, Echad Iyar, is a special day for Chabad, for all Yidden. And that was Rabbi Yisrael Leib's Yortzeit. Well, when I first heard about his life story, you see, I am a mathematician by profession, and so is Rabbi Yisrael, and I like to learn Chassidus, although I can't compare myself to him. But he was Moser v'Nosun l'Chassidus, Limud Chassidus, like you see with Shkida, and I was also, at that time given over to learning Chassidus ad kedei kach that I even considered giving up mathematics, as so many people who learned in universities wanted to do, and some of them did do this. They gave up their profession and devoted themselves to learn Chassidus, and I wanted to do that too. And of course, as in most cases, Rabbi Moshiach told me not to do that. I'm just saying that when I heard about Rabbi Yisrael how it was the profession of the mathematics and the Mesira and Nesina to learn Chassidus were mixed together, embodied in one person, it was an inspiration for me. Just telling you that, the Pshuta Mamash. So, therefore, in Toshin Nun Beis, which was Rabbi Yisrael Leib's 40th year site, 1992, I had the idea to make a conference on, Torah and science, especially as regards chinuch, where the whole Torah and science things becomes very touchy, very tricky, and sometimes very dangerous. And you're talking about Talmidim at the age of education, what they experienced then and what they learned then, and the attitudes that are presented to them then shape their whole lives. So I had the idea to make such a conference and to bring especially Paul Rosenblum, over Shalom, Pesach Rosenblum, and he's the man. He was a very big math professor, world renowned, and bring him out. He's the one to whom the Rebbe Melech Mashiach gave a transcript of Rabbi Yisrael Leib in mathematics for Rosenblum to translate it from German to English and to edit it and put footnotes on it, like you see in that letter from the Friedrich Rebbe. Footnotes were very important by the Rebbeim, and he wanted Rosenblum to publish it in a mathematical journal. And you've probably seen the video of the dialogue between the Rebbe Melech Mashiach and Professor Rosenblum, and I think it was Yud Shvat Tavshin Lamed Hey, something like that, where they're talking to each other about it in English. And Rosenblum was a little reluctant, but then, as Rosenblum later told me, when he was telling me over the whole story, he said he finally realized that the Rebbe Melech Mashiach wanted this paper published. It had some personal meaning to him. It was only then that the Rebbe Melech Mashiach told Rosenblum that it was written by his brother, by Rabbi Yisrael Leib. Until then, he didn't say that. And Rosenblum himself told me that his own impression, because Rebbe Melech Mashiach had sent him the paper in the mail before this dialogue, he told me that his own impression was that it was written by a Russian mathematician, contemporary, who was imprisoned somewhere in the Gulag in Siberia, whatever, and had just had written it in his years of prison, and that's why there were no footnotes and no references to any other current mathematics going on. That's what he assumed. He had no idea that this was from the Rebbe Melech Mashiach's brother. So in Toshin Nun Beis, I had the idea to make this conference, and actually, to make this story a little bit shorter, I was not able to get an answer from the Rebbe Melech Mashiach then. As you know, this was right after Chav Zayin Adar. We're talking about Yud Gimel Iyar, just a little bit after Chav Zayin Adar. And I didn't get an answer, but I consulted with the Shliach where I was living, Moshe Feller, this is in Minnesota. And I said to him, I want to do this. Should we do this? So he said, there was really no way to get an answer from the Moshiach at that time. So he said, look, we make events all the time. We make farbrengens all the time. No, like, what's the shaila? So we did. We made this event, and it was very successful. The next year, Tafshin Nun Gimel, 1993, my family and I had moved here to Crown Heights, where we've been ever since. And at that time, things were eased up. You could write in questions to Rabbi Moshiach and get answers, by Rabbi Moshiach nodding yes or shaking his head no. You know about this. So I wrote into the Rabbi Moshiach and asked explicitly if I should make another conference on Yud Gimel Iyar, Crown Heights, Yud Gimel Iyar, for the 41st year outside, like I did the previous year in Minnesota. And the answer was yes. And from that I understood that it's not just a one-time thing you do, not just a one-time event, but it has to be a pula nimshachas. That if you did it once, then you do it again. 40th year outside is a milestone. 41st year outside is like just another year. But we've been doing it ever since then, every single year. Ad hayom hazeh. This is the 29th. Now this year things are a little different. Previous years we would make it in various cities in the United States, in Canada, and Eretz Yisrael. Most recently, I would say maybe up past 8 years, I think, we've been making them in Eretz Yisrael. Mostly in Beersheba, because that's where my colleagues who helped me organize it live. And twice we made it on the campus of Hebrew University in Yerushalayim. Something a little different this year because of the world situation. We can't make it in one centralized place anywhere in the world. So looks like that's a chisaron. But really, as the expression goes, gam zoom letova, right? Not just gam zoom letova, but with a mem at the end. Gam zoom. That's what you're saying right now. Gam zoom letova. Everything has, every Yerida is tzarech aliyah. There's a big mila to what we're doing now, because since we were not able to make it anywhere in the world, we had to make it everywhere in the world. There's no place on the face of the earth that a person cannot contact, cannot log in. And I see from the millions of participants listed on the sidebar over here, well, yeah, we're getting there. Not quite a million yet. But we have speakers also from the whole world, ranging from Toronto, Canada, to Cape Town, South Africa, and Eretz Yisrael, of course. A few from Eretz Yisrael. Okay. I just want to say a word or two about the theme of the conference. The theme of the conference, if you've seen the notice, is fight COVID, not each other. Now, where did I get that from? And how does it connect with Torah and science, and with Moshiach and science, and the RYAL Institute, and so on? One of the things that didn't make big news, because it wasn't about the virus per se, but it's several weeks ago, the Secretary General of the United Nations made a call to all the nations of the world. Now, listen, I know, you know, we all know that people don't pay much attention to what the Secretary General of the United Nations says, right? He's always making this and that. But you also know that in 1992, when the heads of state of all the members of the Security Council got together at the UN here in New York, which was actually the first time ever that all the heads of state got together there at the same time, and they made this announcement of they want to stop warfare and start a new era and help each other. Nations should help each other instead of, being rivals of each other. Help each other instead of hurting each other. Well, I tell you, if I had seen that as a headline on the newspaper, that day, I would have paid no attention to it. Kol shi kalam, like they say in Arabic. It's just talk. The next day, however, the Rebbe Melech Moshiach made a major sicha out on this, and this is a bombshell. You can't use any weaker word than a bombshell. He described that meeting at the UN in detail, and what they decided and what they announced, and he said that this is the beginning of the famous nevuah of Yeshayahu in Perek Beis. V'chitzu chavosam leitim v'chanisosem lemazmeros lo yisagoyel goy cherev v'lo yilmadu od milchama. Swords into plowshares. And in fact, the United Nations, when it was founded, they have a wall out there it's called the Isaiah wall, where this pasuk is in big letters, engraved on the wall in big words. And the Rebbe Melech Moshiach mentions that wall in the Sikha, in one of the footnotes. So the Rebbe Melech Moshiach says it's the beginning of a new era of the fulfillment of this nevuah of swords to the plowshares. So this announcement a couple of weeks ago by the Secretary General of the UN, it hit me as a new shlav, a new stage, like a new phase in the development of swords into plowshares. And indeed, it was later reported that there were some of the military conflicts going on in various places in the world where they responded to this call and they worked out their differences chick-chock, real quick, and made peace. So fight COVID, not each other. I mean, this is basically what the Secretary General of the UN said. Stop all armed conflicts and start working together to fight the virus. That was his call to the nations. We will focus a little bit on swords. One of the focal points of our Moshiach science work is swords into plowshares. Why? Swords into plowshares is not just a political thing, it's a technological thing. They're going to beat their swords into plowshares. A sword is not just a sword. A sword is a muscle for all military weapons, most of which in recent times have been high-tech, nuclear technology, laser technology, with a lot of computer technology, satellite technology. A lot of this, since the announcement of the Rebbe Melech Moshiach Sicha, there's been a tremendous amount of conversion of this military technology to peaceful uses. And that's one of our jobs at the Rabbi RYAL Institute, is to track that as much as possible. So I wrote a book. You may or may not know about it, but it's called Scientific Thought in Messianic Times. And there's a chapter 3 there. The whole thing is about swords into plowshares, and there's, I think, 170 pages there about it. But that's nothing. There are organizations documenting the transformation of military resources, military bases, military technology to peaceful uses. And these are not religious organizations. They're not looking to promote anything. These are basically social science organizations. They're what's going on in the world? Is the world a good place, a bad place? What's happening? Okay. In fact, I've just mentioned, before I move on, that there's a company established in England called Plowshares Innovations. How about that? And they say beferish that their goal was to follow the swords into plowshares transformation, and they take the technology developed by the British Department of Defense or Defense Ministry, and they transform it or whatever they do, whatever find a popular need for it in the civilian population, and they make it available and do what they have to do to make it available to the public for peaceful or healthful or economic benefits, peaceful purposes. We're a little concerned about China. China is one of the 5 permanent members on the UN Security Council. So that means that they were involved in that declaration in 1992. You see, there's 15 members on the Security Council, but only 5 of them are permanent. The other 10 are rotating positions. China is one of the 5 permanent members. Of all the permanent members, 3 out of 5, there's no shaila that they're on board with the swords and the plowshares without stepping back. I can show you graphs that show that what's called their militarization index, that for England, France, and the United States, it's gone down. Even for China, it's gone down. But for Russia, it went up and down, up and down, up. Overall, it's a little bit up. So I was watching Putin very carefully for the past couple of years and see, is he a good guy or a bad guy? And I concluded he's a good guy. You know, in the West, the United States and Western Europe, it's popular to demonize him. And especially in America here, if you don't demonize Putin, that means you're part of the conspiracy of Trump and the Russians to steal the election from Hillary Clinton, whatever. That if you've been following that, you see when the Tsar says it's Alma de Shikra, you get a new window opened up into that. But China's different. China's not been militaristic very much, even though they show off their military a lot, especially in the South China Sea. But without going into that too much, it's really a bluff, because what they're really interested in is money and subtle power. Okay, they do want to, you might say, bluntly take over control of the world, but they have no intention of doing this militarily. They do this by other means. A lot of intellectual property is stolen from the United States by China. A lot of hacking has gone on. This corporation Huawei is they're a bad actor. The United States is trying to get military positions and academic positions in the United States not to use the Huawei computer system, because that's what they have stuff built into the system that steals information. That's how you do all this intellectual property theft, to steal it from the American users and use it in China. We've suffered tremendous losses that way. Okay, I will just say about that, it's not a good thing, but it is a good thing that they're not doing any military adventurism. And in my opinion, this is my personal shot in the pasuk. It says, "Lo yisa goy al goy cherv v'lo yomadu od milchama. V'chitzu chavrosam le'itim v'chanisosem mazmeros. Lo yisa goy al goy cherv v'lo yomadu od milchama." What's the logic of the order of the things in those pasuk? They're going to beat their swords into plowshares. Then they're not going to fight. Then they're not even going to learn any more war. It seems a little bit out of order. First, it should say they're going to stop fighting. Then, like the Radak said, since they don't need weapons anymore because they're not fighting, then they beat the swords into plowshares. And then what does exactly it mean they won't learn any more warfare? So I think, first of all, even the first thing that comes is swords into plowshares. The process begins. That already has begun. The Moshiach clearly says that it's not complete yet. That's what the Gula Shlema, but it has begun. Second step is Lo Yisa Goyal Goycherev. They're actually going to stop wars, all wars. That's a second phase of swords into plowshares. But even though they will stop Lo Yisa Goyal Goycherev, they will not raise swords against each other. There are other ways of fighting, like what the Chinese are doing. And actually, every country does this to a certain extent. Hacking into another country's security computer systems, maybe like China likes to do, steal intellectual property that way, interfere with elections. If you listen in America, what's going on, past few years, there's this horrible accusation that Russia and China were interfering in our elections and trying to affect the outcome. Okay, the truth is, nobody mentions, but you look further into this, you see, every single country in the world does that a little bit to a certain extent. Number one. Number two, on the other hand, it's not that easy to affect an election by just changing a few votes in a voting machine in Kansas. That's not going to affect the whole country. Okay, but my point is, lo yilmadu od milchama. Even after they stop fighting militarily, they will still be doing yilmadu. Right? There'll be intellectual cyber warfare. There'll be intellectual means of rivalry, of competing unfairly with each other and stuff like that. The third stage of the swords into plowshares process is v'lo yilmadu od milchama, that will also stop. And then finally, all the nations of the world will live together in peace and harmony, just like all the Nevuos of Yeshayahu and all the other Nevi'im. And David Avdi Nasi Lahem Le'olam, one king over the whole world. That's Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach. L'hoya Hashem LaMelech al kol ha'aretz b'yamu Hashem echad v'shmo echad. Now, let me go to our first speaker, which is, I must confess that these are not live speeches. I'm live. You see me, hear me moving, waving to you. But because of the time differences of the speakers, and also because of wanted to make sure that there would be no glitches in the technology and trying to reach somebody at the right time to make sure he's on live, we asked the speakers to record. And so to record videos of the presentation, so that's what you're going to see. And between each of the lecturers, I'll give a...
I would like to start with a proclamation.
Okay, so I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Iyar Gottfried. Dr. Iyar Gottfried is, again, he's a friend of mine and been a lecturer various times since the early years of our conferences in the 1990s. He is an environmental scientist associated with the University of Toronto. And he's going to speak in English about in the name of Moshiach and science in general. He's a great intellectual and has helped Professor Branover in translations of some of his Branover's books, like recently the book has been published, Mind Over Matter. Okay, this is the Rebbe Moshiach's letters on Torah and science in general. Based on a book compiled earlier by Professor Branover in Hebrew, and Dr. Gottfried got it translated and with Hosefos, expanded on it and in English. So again, Toronto, Canada, and then we'll go back to Israel. Okay, Dr. Iyar Gottfried. Bring up the share. That's fine.
Rabbi Isai, I would like to start with a proclamation. Yechi Adonenu, Morenu v'Rabbeinu, Melech HaMashiach le'olam v'oed. I want to wish a great and a hearty Yasher Koyach to Reb Shimon Silman for organizing this event, for inviting me, giving me the privilege to participate in this auspicious event at this auspicious time of Yod Gimel Iyar, and for his work and commitment to the Rebbe's in Yonim, to the RYAL Institute, Reb Yisrael Aryeh Leib Institute for Moshiach and Science, which has been going on for many years, and the privilege of working with him on many of those occasions has been a very special schus for me, and I'm glad we're participating together with all those who are connecting remotely. And soon we'll connect together in reality in the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi with Moshiach Tzidkenu. That whole concept of Moshiach and science is kind of bizarre when you think about it. What is science? Science is Welt. What is Moshiach? Moshiach is Elokus. Welt on one side, Elokus on the other side. Science is Seichel. Seichel is cold. Moshiach is fire, enthusiasm, it's warmth. Seichel, ultimately, there is nothing more dead than the Seichel, natural Seichel. Seichel in Inyanim Tiviyim is, as the Rebbe puts it in a Yom Yom, Nisa. But Baruch Hashem, there's a thing called Tchiyas HaMeisim. Mashiach is Tchiyas HaMeisim. So really, Mashiach and science, be'etzem, is cholent and borscht. It seems to not make sense to put it together. The Tanya, I believe it's in Perek Ches, goes into great lengths to discuss what is Chochmas Olam, Chochmas Chetzenius. Chochmas Chetzenius is Metame Chochmas Shebenefesh. Unlike other Averas will contaminate the Levushim, Machshava, Dibur, Maaseh, they contaminate the Midas, all kinds of Averas contaminating all kinds of things. But it takes something really special, like science, to be Metame, Chochma Shebenefesh. What do I have within me that's more valuable than Chochma Shebenefesh? That's my download of Elokus. That's the ability of the Raya Mehemna to feed me the faith in my Seichel, so that I can transfer my midas, so that I can become a mensch, I can go through my spheres of Eimer and become a little bit better person for Kabbalah Satorah, and ultimately for Kabbalah's Teirasei Shal Mashiach. So now I want to celebrate science. It seems very strange. But stranger things have happened. If we rewind history back to Gan Eden, we're going to find that in Gan Eden, everything started, all the problems started with the Nachash. Nachash, Bigematria, Mashiach. The very worst enemies become the very greatest allies. We know this from the Rebbe, we know this from the Alter Rebbe. Transformation is our game. Ishapcha, Iskafia, and Ishapcha, we're taking Lamai Adin Kates to Lamata Mata Adin Tachlis, and you can hardly find a mimer that's not about this Indian. So let me tell a story. It's a published story. It was, I think, in the Chafs, that an entourage came late at night, not on a regular Yechidus night, and they came to 770, black limousines, many armed snipers come out of one or more vehicles, take positions around 770, ready for whatever might happen. And then from the other limousine, a group of distinguished looking gentlemen come out, some carrying briefcases, filing in briskly into 770 late at night, and they come into Gan Eden Elyon, and they stay there for some time. The people that are around, it's quite a commotion. What's going on? Soon, or after some time, they file out and they leave. They get into the limo, the armed snipers get into their limos, and they speed off into the night. Who's there? Reuven Dunin. Reuven Dunin had special privileges, special access to the Rebbe when he wanted. He came into the Rebbe because he wanted to know, who were these people? What is going on? He asked the Rebbe, The Rebbe told him that they came from the Department of Defense, from the American military apparatus. He said, what did they want? They had questions about nuclear energy. Rebbe, I hope you didn't tell them anything. He said, I did. He says, why did you help them? Nuclear energy is very bad. So the Rebbe told him that there's three reasons why he helped him. That the first reason is this country sheltered my father-in-law, the Rebbe, when he came here. And for that alone, I owe them a debt of gratitude to do whatever I can to serve it for the benefit of this country. The second reason is the nuclear energy is not a bad thing. Nuclear energy, like a knife, it can be used to hurt or it can be used to cut food. Nuclear energy can have tremendous benefit. It can also be tremendously destructive. And the third reason that I help them is, don't know exactly the Lashon, but as I remember, Ze sollen wissen, wer sein in mir. And the Rebbe pointed at his holy self. So, regarding this middle idea, what science can be used for, the Rebbe discusses this in a number of sikhas and maimarim, but a particular sikha, which is a template sikha, different than the mishpatim, the base that Rabbi Dr. Silman likes to always point out. But the second noyach in Chelik Tesvav of Lekutei Sichas, Parshas Noyach, it's talking about Torah and science there very specifically, that when the flood happened, it was the windows of heaven and the fountains of the deep. The Rebbe, quoting the Ashmaris Abayker, is talking about the windows of heaven being Pnimius Torah and the fountains of the deep being Chochmah, basing this on what the Zohar says, that the Zohar said it's upper wisdom and lower wisdom, and a Kabbalistic sefer the Rebbe brings down says the upper wisdom is Chassid. The Rebbe points out the upper wisdom is Chassidus, and the Ashmaris Abayker is telling you that the lower wisdom is the knowledge of science. And that these things come up in the 6th century of the 6th millennium in order to make tikkun in the world and prepare it for the 7th millennium for Geula. So the Rebbe is asking, obviously Pnimius Torah coming out in the 1840s, the times of the Tzemach Tzedek, Alter Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek, the publishing of Torah, Lekutei Torah, that you could say that's talking about God and the soul and the purpose of life and the inner meanings and the things that have to pave the way for our God consciousness so we'll be ready for Geula. But what science can help? And the Rebbe gives a few ways in which science helps to pave the way for Geula. He gives an example of radio waves. He says that they can first of all be used for the purpose of spreading Torah and the purpose of empowering mitzvahs. For example, that Tanya was being taught on the radio. This is the developments of science in the service of Torah and Hafatzas Hamayanas Chutza. The second aspect is that it gives us meshalim and interpretations, a way to analogize and understand in Yonim of Elokus. For example, the idea that there is an eye that hears, eye that sees, and an ear that hears. So the radio waves allow, because what's being said over here is being transmitted over there. I'm sitting here in Thornhill, Canada. You're in Eretz Yisrael, and you're in California, and you're in New York, and you're in somewhere else. And the whole idea that there's an ear that hears remotely what's being said over here now was at that time a chiddush, and that chiddush gave us an idea of things we learned from Torah. But when the animal soul hears it, when you can physically experience it, now the meaning becomes even greater. Then the third level that the Rebbe alludes to, doesn't go in any depth in that sikha, is that the inyanim of science themselves are an expression of very deep concepts, of godly concepts. And there's a godliness in the understanding of nature's working, because God himself, Elokim b'gematria hateva, God himself is invested in those natural laws. So we're understanding nature, we're understanding the mind of God, understanding Yonim of science in order to understand Mi she'amar v'haya ha'olam. So science can be very useful, and I want to explore a little bit of that aspect of science. When I was preparing for this, I was asked by someone, according to science, can our thoughts affect physical objects in our environment? It was a great question. I thought, you know what, don't bother me. I'm preparing a talk about Moshiach and science. Don't ask me if thoughts can affect physical objects in our environment. Maybe it can, maybe it can't. And it started to work on me. By Ashkocha Pratis, I was asked this question. I couldn't have been asked a better question. The question on a deeper level, especially knowing who was asking, is, can our attitude create Geula? Is Geula a function? The Rebbe said, open your eyes, see the reality unfolding. See Mashiach is at the table with us right now. See the things that are the neflois. Open your eyes, the nisim and the neflois that are right in front of you. So that, our attitude, and also learning in Yonim, Mashiach and Geula, the way they are in Torah, the Rebbe is telling us very clearly, this is the Derech Yashar, this is the way to actualize Geula. Learn it, think it, perceive it, it'll be tracht gut, vezayin gut. This is an inyan of Emunah. But is this an inyan of Seichel? Can tracht gut, vezayin gut, can that be found in science? According to science, can our thoughts affect physical objects? Can it affect our environment? Can it affect remotely? How does this actually work? So, in the way of mipsari echsa elakah, from my flesh I'll see God, I will try to give you a few pearls, things that I found inspiring, and I hope you'll also. In one of my previous professions, I was facilitating intercountry adoption from Russia to Canada. Hundreds of orphans, one by one, that went from Russian orphanages were placed in Canadian families. So I had an assistant, a Latvian non-Jewish woman whose name was Lydia. We had, at that time, we had two families going to Moscow district, each going to a different orphanage at around the same time, each adopting a different child, but around the same age, boys around a year and a half, and similar socioeconomic background, similar setup for what they would have to deal with, dealing with the same regional government of Moscow and the same Canadian authorities. And Lydia said, watch what happens with these families, our clients. This family has a bad attitude. They're going to have bad experiences. This family has a good attitude. They're going to have great experience. And their whole experience is going to be different because their attitudes are different. I said, Lydia, what are you looking at these poor people with a bad eye? They're going to have a bad experience. She says, no, that's how it works. I said, maybe they'll interpret experiences differently, and that'll affect them, and they will take it differently, and that'll be the difference. She says, no, Dr. Gottfried, you don't understand how the world works. According to your attitude, that is how the objective events of your life unfold. I said, Lydia, of course, I've studied ideas like this, but this is how you see life? She says, it's obvious. Wait and see. So I thought, okay, I'm a little bit of a scientist. It's an experiment. What's going to happen? Sure enough, the couple doesn't have to be like this. It can be the opposite, but here's how it played out. The couple with a bad attitude, they had difficulty at the orphanage, they had difficulty with the child, they had difficulty with the medical clearances, they had difficulty in the court, they had difficulty in their hotel, they had difficulty with their flight. Many of these things had nothing to do on an obvious level with their attitude. Whereas everything with the other family was like a hot knife through butter. They were done in record time. Everything was smooth, and they came home and happy. Fantastic. Tracht gut, wird sein gut. I've heard it somewhere before. We've all heard it somewhere before. But when you see it happening, you feel it a little differently. Let me take it out of a tiny context and make it in a slightly larger context. There is a doctor, a medical doctor in the United States by the name of John Sarno. He wrote a number of books, one of which is called Healing Back Pain. A lot of people have chronic pain, back pain, knee pain. These are interesting things. And he happened to be an expert in this field for many decades. And he developed a theory of mind-based medicine regarding back pain and how it works. A very radical theory. He went quite against a lot of medical dogma, and yet he was not trashed by his peers. He was not trashed by the journals. Wikipedia has a very balanced and respectable page about him, and no matter how radical he was, because he was such a great doctor with such a great pedigree and such great experience, it was seichel, but it was at a very high level. What did he teach? He said, imagine that you have chronic pain. You have back pain. Is it your slip disc? Well, it's very interesting. If you take a look, there are many people with slip discs that don't have pain, and there are many people with pain that don't have slip discs. So the correlation is far from one-to-one. What's really going on with back pain? So he started analyzing this, and he noticed a number of things. And he taught basically as follows: fast forward. If you experience a flare-up of chronic pain, stop and think for a moment, what happened now or recently that my emotional state changed? I must have had a trigger event or a trigger thought that made me feel bad. Because when I feel bad, my brain, in my amygdala and my thalamus, I will emit cortisol, and I will produce adrenaline, and it's not going to be fight or flight, but it's going to create tension and pressure. That will create anoxic conditions in my joints, reduce the oxygen levels in my joints. That will promote inflammation, and the inflammation will be the cause of my pain. It happens very fast. And all you need to do to start to reduce and even eliminate chronic pain in a large percentage of cases is to be aware. Just know that you had a trigger thought and you started an inflammation reaction. Once you know you had a trigger thought, you might not even know what enraged you and what frustrated you and how it was based and who dropped you on your head as a baby. You're maybe blind to all those realities. But once you know that there is an emotional cause that puts you in a different state of mind, it removes the emotional stress, and that boosts the oxygen level in the joints, and it takes away the pain. I have seen this work practically, personally, and work for years and years, reversing chronic pain. Very interesting. Tracht gut, wird sein gut. Tracht, even not good. Just don't tracht bad. It's already a plus. There is an institute in Harvard University of Mind Body Institute. I remember when they first founded it, it was 20 years ago or more. They said that back in those times that more than 2/3 of visits to family physicians are mind-based problems. If a person feels ill, it's a mentality thing. Controlling the mentality is going to control yourself. But what about controlling things outside of you? So for this, I have another story. A medical doctor, a friend of mine by the name of Brian Dressler, when he was an undergraduate pre-med still, he made a little spare cash by participating in a psychological research experiment. It was called Friends Research, where if you were close friends with somebody, you did the research together. One person would be watching a video of open heart surgery. The other person didn't know what video is being watched. In fact, they're in a Faraday chamber, a room which is electromagnetically shielded from any radiation. No radio waves could go in there, no magnetic waves, no signals were coming in. The room was padded, the room was quiet. It was at the far other end of that large building where the psychological research took place. And simultaneously, this person is in a reclining chair and the lights are dimmed and she's got half ping pong balls over her eyes, so she only sees white, and just sitting comfortably, hearing nothing, seeing nothing. All there is a little galvanic skin response electrode resting on her skin, like a lie detector type of thing. Are you schwitzing a little bit now? How much are you schwitzing? And time is going by. Half an hour, she doesn't know what's going on with her friend. Her friend is watching open heart surgery. He's trying to convey his feelings to his friend. How does that work? Well, you just try and think about your friend and share your feelings with your friend as you're watching this video. Comes to the point where they're talking about open heart surgery, so it wasn't so emotional. But when they actually made the incision and they spread apart the chest cavity and they raise the heart out of the body and it's pumping and you see all of the gore, and then he starts manipulating that heart, well, you can be sure that the average person is going to have an emotional reaction to seeing this video. It's going to be distressing to them. You know, they're not experienced heart surgeons. They're just undergraduate students. And it turns out that in the vast majority of cases, exactly at the time when the incision and the active surgery is going on, that's the time when the galvanic skin response of the friend in a far removed area is having some excitement. Why do I mention this? Because, as we learn in Likutei Diburim and many other places, machshava is poil. Not only is machshava poil on you, machshava is poil on somebody else. As Friedrich Rebbe writes, you look at somebody, they turn around. Yeah, it's true. But there's more to it. We can affect each other. These types of experiments were not invented randomly. These types of experiments were made possible because of a huge shift in science that took place b'dafka in the Rebbe's lifetime. Of course, still the Rebbe's lifetime, but we're talking about in the 20th century. Classical physics, the kind of physics where tell me the particles and the forces, I'll tell you everything that'll happen till the end of time. I don't need a God, I don't need a soul, don't tell me human beings have a purpose of life. That was the science that was the enemy of Emunah. That was the age of enlightenment, the dark age of the Maskilim, and all the historical reasons why it went that direction. Science ba'etzem isn't bad, but they used science for a denial of God, a denial of Ruchnius, the denial of Tachlis, of the human species and of the individual. People became unimportant, life became meaningless, and of course anti-religious. This quantum theory, this new physics that emerged in the 20th century, had many irrational, supra-rational things about it, that nature was behaving in a way that's beyond nature. It wasn't a billiard ball universe. There were, call them magical properties that frustrated the rationalist mind to no end. Problems that could not be solved by reason, still cannot be solved, and is known to be unsolvable by a rational process. And yet, these laws of nature are true. I have a book that I acquired long ago, returned to me recently, a big fat book, results of 30 years of research at Princeton University by the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Project, PEAR, P-E-A-R, by John and Dunn, J-A-H-N, I believe is his name, the dean of either physics or it was engineering department, and his research associate, Brenda Dunn, I believe her name was. They assembled a collection, a report on all this research. Besides their report, they published in peer-reviewed journals things that you would expect in a fantasy. Even today, scientists, many of them have trouble just simply to accept these things. And yet, it's done with the scientific method, showing that consciousness creates reality, can even affect physical objects in experimental situations, in replicable experiments. Remarkable. Let me quote one more of this ilk. It's a whole body of literature. Nothing less than the British Medical Journal in the December of 2001. It's not the only study like this, but it's one that I read about remote retroactive intercessory prayer. What does that mean? They had approximately 3,300 heart patients that they studied. These patients were already admitted, they were already treated, they already had their health outcomes. This, how long they stayed in the hospital, how quickly they got better, if they got worse, if they died, whatever happened to them, happened to them. They divided this group randomly. This is a random, controlled, blind trial. They divided the group randomly into two groups. One group they prayed for 4 to 6 years after this hospital admission. They davened for them, essentially a prayer of Refuah Shlema U'Krova. That was the basic idea of the prayer, for a specific person's name. People enlisted for the prayer project. They didn't know who they were praying for. They only prayed for a certain person of a certain name with a heart condition. They didn't know the details. That's the only detail they knew. The other group were not prayed for by this particular prayer group. What was the results? Highly statistical significance. Well, and one variable statistical significance of 0.04, the other one 0.01. Very statistically significant that the group that was prayed for retroactively had shorter stays and got better, and shorter stays and got better quicker. What's that all about? How can something I do today affect what's going to be before? Well, in Torah terms, this is not so hard to understand. Why do the Jews today have a schus to get out of Mitzrayim? Because later they're going to be at Har Sinai, they're going to accept the Torah. So the schus of later is accounting for them now. Things that happen in the future are going to affect what happens in the past. And it's not only in Tanakh, we find it in the Gemara, this whole idea of a Torah time machine, that things that are happening in the future affect the past, and then that affects the present. And time is a stretchy thing. It's not like past, present, and future in blocks like we used to think in the classical physics. Time is a stretchy concept, and it's an all-inclusive concept. And things can jump across space without going between the spaces between. Things, according to quantum physics, can jump in time, and things can have opposite properties that don't fit together, and they fit together. Nimna ha-nimnois, impossibilities are impossible, but they happen. So I want to give an example in quantum physics, and I want to give an example in Yiddishkeit, and see how that connects with Moshiach. In quantum physics, one of the what you're dealing with is very small things that are so submicroscopic you can't exactly see them with a microscope. They're the size of the photon, the smallest particle of light, the size of an electron, the smallest unit of energy, the size of a proton or a neutron, the nucleus. Things that are smaller than an atom is the field of quantum physics. Now, this is not just theoretical. Our GPSs and our cell phones and our medical technologies are all working on now computers are working on a quantum physical basis. But the science was completely bizarre when discovered, and it was a revolution that took decades to settle. So, what is this property I want to discuss is wave-particle duality. An electron can be observed as a wave, so it's like an energy distribution. It's like a cloud of presence. You cannot say exactly where it is, but it's around, it's here. It's got a field. That's the electron as a wave. The electron, and it's just sort of radiating out. You know, if you block it, it'll behave like a wave, like a water wave, and it'll have its ups and downs like a wave. Or you can observe the electron as a particle, in which case it has a mass, it has a velocity, it's going somewhere, it's doing something. If you choose to observe it as a particle, it's not a wave. If you choose to observe it as a wave, it's a wave and not a particle. Practically speaking, the same electron cannot be actualized as both. Cannot be. So what is it? Is it a wave or a particle? Before you observe it, potentially it's both. Actually, it's one, or in observation, it's one or the other. And actually, what is it really? It's something beyond both wave and particle. We can't really describe what it really is. So that's a very interesting kind of a thing. It leads us to many interesting conclusions about nature and about Yiddishkeit. I want to point out one parallel specifically. We have a place called the Makom Ha'aron. As the Mishnah says, Makom Ha'aron Eina Mina Mida. The place of the Aron Kodesh in the Beis HaMikdash or in the Mishkan was dimensionless space. It took up space and it didn't take up space. How? As is well known, it was 2.5 amas wide. So in the Mishkan, which was 10 amas wide in the Kodesh Kedoshim, if you measured from one side of the Aron to the wall, so that was 5 amas. From the other side of the Aron to the other wall was also 5 amas. So, but the Aron itself was 2.5. 5 and 5 and 2.5 is 12.5. But it's not 12.5 wide. When you measured the Aron, it was 10. When you measured the Kodesh Kedoshim, it was 10 amas. When you measured each part, it added up to 12.5 because the Aron did take up space. So does the Aron take up space or it doesn't take up space? What is it really? Is it taking up space or not? So the answer seems to be it depends on how you look at it. In observation, it either is taking space or it's not taking space. If it's not taking space, then we cannot say that it is. And if it is taking space, we cannot say that it's not. Before I observe it, we can talk about it like we're talking about it now. It's potentially either. What is it actually? It's a Gilui Elokus. This is the place where God decided to show Nimna HaNimnois, the impossibility of things that are impossible. That's really what God is all about. Gilui Etzem. That's what Moshiach is all about. What is Moshiach? Atzmis Mahus Meluvish Beguf. What is Gila? It's a Gilui Elokus, which is higher than Seder Ishtalshalis, in its Seder Ishtalshalis, that Soiviv, much beyond Soiviv. But Soiviv can be revealed and be Meluvish in Mamali, and we are not going to be blown away. Atzmis, which is higher than Soiviv and Mamali, will be revealed, and we will still exist. How could we exist? In the face of that, Einod Milvade. Okay, in Echanami, and in Milvade, and we're also here. This is the Geula that we're looking to. So what does that actually do for us? What it does for us is it tells us the whole fabric of nature, the whole universe is comprised of these little electrons and protons and photons. They're not somewhere else. They're wherever you are, they are. And whatever you're made of, you're made out of those. They're all subject to coming into being with a co-creation with yourself. The way you look at, because your structure is comprised of these entities, how you reflect on who you are and what you are is up to you. So you look at yourself as entering Geula, you visualize Geula, you look at yourself as a Shnersonsky, as an expression of Rebbe, and now you're a Chassid. See yourself as a Chassid, you'll be a Chassid. You see yourself as, oy vey, there's this going on in the world and there's that going on in the world. I'm powerless. I'm hopeless. I have no impact. I have no relevance. I can't anymore. That's an option. You either opt out or you opt in. If you opt in to Gilu Yetzim, these are irreversible advances in science. I chose one. But the sciences are moving inexorably to Geula. You could look in mathematics, and you could look in physics, you could look in chemistry, you could look in genetics, you could look at ecology, you could look at environment, you could look at society, the geopolitical. Any area you look, you'll see the stream is flowing. We're moving into a Geula era. The only friction is, what's between the temples? What's between these temples? So we need to actualize the Mashiach inside, and then we're going to see La'alter L'Geula v'hine zeh Mashiach ba u'kfar ba Mashiach, the Rebbe Melech Mashiach here and now with us, connecting with us, taking us out of Golus in the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi. Yechid Aneinu, Bareinu Rabbeinu, Melech Mashiach, Le'ilam V'ed.
Okay. That was some speech. I'd like to pick up on a few things that Dr. Gottfried said, because these are things that we've been talking about. First of all, the example he said about people praying for someone who's sick had an effect on, not only had an effect on them, but had a retroactive effect on them. So I'd like to mention once again, our friend and colleague, Professor Yomio Branover, has been sick, a long time, years. And I mentioned his condition at the beginning of the conference. And I want to say once again, we should all have him in mind. If we're zocha these days to be able to daven with a minyan, say a mishaberach for him, Yirmiyahu ben Devora. In any case, wherever we are, however we daven, we sing in Shmones for Einu Hashem v'nei Rafei, Hosheinu v'nei Roshea, Baruch Atah Hashem Rafei Cholei Amor Yisrael. Please have him in mind. Yom Yom ben Devor should have for Shalema. Very precious neshama. Yiraton, they should also have a very precious and healthy goof. Physically and spiritually well, healthy and well and strong. The other thing is, Dr. Gottfried referred to the Sikha from many years ago of Pashas Noach, where Rebbe Moshiach talks about the Zohar that says that in the 600th year of the 6th millennium, there's going to be a flood, parallel to the flood in the time of Noach. The Pasuk in Pashas Noach says, in the 600th year of the life of Noach, the windows of heaven opened up, the fountains below broke open, and water came from everywhere, a flood. But this flood, the Zohar says, is the flood of knowledge. The heavens will open up in the 600th year of the 6th millennium, which is the secular year 1840. And wisdom will come down from above, which Rabbi Moshiach explains. This is a publication and the Hafotza, beginning with the Hafotza of the Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe, Likutei Torah and Torah Or. Wisdom will come down from above, and wisdom will come up from below. The fountains of wisdom below will break open. And that is the Chiddush, that the wisdom from below is the sciences. And the Zohar concludes by saying that these two developments, the wisdom coming down from above and the wisdom coming up from below, are a preparation for Yemos HaMashiach. And then Dr. Gottfried went on to review some of the Sikha. Now, as a matter of fact, that Sikha is actually the foundation, the founding concept, or the founding principle of our Moshiach and Science organization. And that's exactly one of the things that were one of our two major themes that we investigate, besides the swords into plowshares, which is, okay, we spoke about before. The other thing is unifying theories in science, because of the three ways that science prepares the world, modern science now prepares the world for Yemos HaMashiach. Rabbi Moshiach explains it's because modern science shows the unity in nature in a way like never before, and that's a preparation for the revelation of the absolute unity of Hashem and Yemos HaMashiach. Specifically, Rabbi Moshiach refers to the fact that once upon a time, the philosophers and the scientists thought that everything in the world was, every material was different material. Every force was a different force with a different source. What modern science, starting in the 1800s, discovered is the number of physical elements that everything is made up from is a minimum, very small, it's relatively small number. And then even that is broken down to protons, neutrons, and electrons, which is only three different things, just organized differently and different quantities and different structures. And all the forces in the world, there are not many, many different forces. There are four fundamental forces: electromagnetic, gravity, weak force, weak nuclear force, and strong nuclear force. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hear a few lectures on unifying theories in science. I'm going to bring on a well-known Abosai. Let me tell you a story. I mentioned at the beginning of the conference a few hours ago that in the past few years we've been making the conferences, the Yud Gimel Iyar, Moshiach and Science Conference in Eretz Yisrael, most of the time in Beersheba. One time, before the conference, while we were planning the conference, I wrote a letter to the Rebbe Melech Moshiach, and I put it in Igros Kodesh, asking for a bracha, even asking if we should make the conference in Eretz Yisrael, and asking for a bracha. So in Igros Kodesh, the Rebbe Melech Moshiach's answer was that if there is an Ish, Baal Meretz, an energetic man who can work with you on it, then you should do it. Now, I'm happy to tell you that we have such an energetic man. That is my colleague, Harav Shlomo Dubnik from Beersheba, who worked tirelessly on this, behind the scenes, contacting the speakers, putting it all together. And as he does every year in our conferences in Eretz Yisrael, whether they're in Beersheba or the times we did it in Yerushalayim at Hebrew University, but he is the man behind the scenes, Ish Baal Meretz, who deserves the most intense and profuse thanks. And you didn't see him tonight on the video screen or hear him, but his His fingerprints are all over the place. And so, I conclude with Hachoshes Yechi Adoneinu Mereinu Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach Le'olam V'od. Yechi Adoneinu Mereinu Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach Le'olam V'od. Yechi Adoneinu Mereinu Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach Le'olam V'od. And I want to ask you again, please be in touch with us. Go to our website, www.ryal.org, RYAL, easy to remember, Rabbi Yisrael Aryaleib. Email us at moshiach.science, or without the dot, moshiachscience@gmail.com. And as we conclude, I'm going to put the notice back up on the screen, where it has the contact information at the bottom. And I wish you all besoros tovos ubrios tovo, simcha v'tov levov. As many of the speakers, Amir emphasized tonight that it's the tachkut v'tzayin good, the simcha v'tov levov. Rabbi Fargon mentioned the same thing, and others too. That is an important fundamental in Chabad, especially, and in Hasidus Bichlal, the simcha b'tochen b'Hashem, that, as Dr. Gottfried said, we believe 100% that our thoughts can change reality. There are times when people wrote to the Rebbe Melech Moshiach about someone who was sick, very sick. The Rebbe Melech Moshiach would answer, Tach gut v'tzayin gut. And the guy had trouble, integrating that into himself. He was depressed. It was a relative. He was depressed and saddened by the medical situation. But he decided, the Kabbalah soul, to do that, to start thinking good. And the relative got literally miraculously better. So the guy came back to the Rebbe Melech Moshiach and told him the good news that his relative, it might have been his father, is cured and is now out of the hospital and recovering. And the Rebbe Melech Moshiach said to him, and when did he start getting better? So the guy laughed. He said, yes, when I started thinking good, he got better. It works. It's going to work for all of us. And we can make the Geula visible in the world just by looking for it in the world, just by noticing it in the world, by looking at the world differently, not with our Golas eyes, with our Gula eyes. That's why I emphasize so much swords into plowshares, because that's something that's easy to see. You just have to read the right newspapers, the right journals, and you see here and there, a lot of places, there are transformations taking place. Even though the world is not perfect yet, the swords of the plowshares is not done. The Moshiach said in the Sikha, it's not complete, but it started, and it's happening, and it's continuing. Sometimes slower, sometimes faster, but it is an ongoing process. Once you cross the threshold into a nevuah of the Geula, there's no turning back. Yeshayahu said it's going to happen. So, and the Rebbe Melech Moshiach said it started to happen. Well, it's a one-time thing in the entire history of mankind that they'll phase out the wars, stop the wars, transform the utensils of war, the money put into war, and transform that all into peaceful uses. And once that happens, once that Nevuah Yeshayahu is starting to unfold, then we are in a new part of history. That part of history, that part of the Geula, where the Chitzuk Havros from the Itim takes place. I'm saying again, it's easy to see. Just look for it. You'll find it in the newspapers. Maybe it's not the headline on page 1. Maybe the New York Times will try to suppress it, but just turn the pages and look for it. You'll find it. Go on the internet. You'll find it. Google it. On that note, Yechiya Melech Mashiach, Tachkut v'tzayin good, be well and have good news. She should see the Rebbe Melech Mashiach Magoli, immediately take of Me'er Mamash, Rabbeinu Melech Mashiach Magoli, Mashlim Hagula, take of Me'er Mamash, Amin Ken Yehi Ratzon. There's the contact information once again.